It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ference is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ference cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference, and if you want to reach me, it's yourpersonalbank.com, and yes, you will reach me. So the big economic news this past week is the annual rate of inflation has now dropped below 3%. This turns out to be the first time that has happened since March of 2021. And while obviously an inflation rate of 2.9 is better news than what we've had for the last 3 years, the thing I don't want anyone to misunderstand is this. Just because the rate of increase of inflation is now below 3% does not mean the prices of goods and services are going down. This is what you hear from the legacy media and the politicians, or at least what they try to infer. The reality is the rate of increase is slowing down, but prices are still going up. In fact, they're still going up at this point, according to the government numbers, about 2.9% per year. This happens to be about 50% higher than the Federal Reserve target rate of about 2% inflation. So although, granted, it's better news, the rate of increase of inflation is slowing down. It's still above the target rate of the Federal Reserve's target inflation rate. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, because these articles now are saying they're now discussing that a rate cut is on the horizon and that the Federal Reserve is going to give us rate cuts because employment is slowing down, that type of thing. I don't want you to get ahead of yourself. While certainly it's possible the Federal Reserve could give us a small rate cut before the end of this year, it's still unlikely because, for one, the rate of increase of inflation is still above their target rate. Their target rate is about 2%. It's now 2.9, which is the first time in 3 years, over 3 years actually. The Federal Reserve has repeatedly stated that they want to see inflation rates down and be there for a while before they do anything. We'll see if they stick to their guns on that. The second thing you need to understand is, why is inflation rates, or the rate of increase of inflation, starting to slow down finally? The main reason is because of the excess savings that American consumers had due to the COVID relief has now dried up. The amount of funds that the federal government helicoptered into the system, into our economy, was something that we've never seen before. That has never happened in the history of our country. In fact, I don't believe any country in the history of mankind has seen that type of economic stimulus injected into its economy. It was an unprecedented effort. Obviously, it's going to have unprecedented and unknown ramifications. We are just starting to feel some of those now. Some of those we've felt through inflation, of course. So the fact of the matter is, because American consumers are now running out of money, running out of extra money to spend, that is causing them to not spend as much. The statistics are all pointing to that fact. That means the rate of inflation, or the demand for goods and services, is starting to decline. Therefore, the increase on that inflation is starting to slow down. That is good news. Of course, that does affect unemployment also. A lot of employment involves producing goods and services for consumers. So when consumers start spending less, for example, Home Depot just came out with a report showing that spending at Home Depot this past quarter was down, I believe, around 3%. And that's a significant decrease nationwide for a company like that when you look at it. Home Depot often is considered a leading economic indicator in terms of economic activity. As consumers are less willing to spend money to remodel their home, that's a great indication of where the economy is at and where earnings are at. Of course, with less consumers purchasing, there's less demand needed for goods and services, less need for some of the jobs that people have producing these goods and services. My point is simple. All this should be expected. If you missed last week's show, I'm really going to encourage you to go to yourpersonalbank.com because you can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows, by the way. Each has its own topic. But again, I highly recommend it if you missed it because I discussed quite extensively the likelihood of a rate cut in the near future from the Federal Reserve. A lot of people out there think that the Federal Reserve is more concerned about a recession than inflation, and that is exactly incorrect. They're dead wrong. Federal Reserve's far more concerned about inflation than a recession. A recession actually helps the Federal Reserve. It helps them defeat inflation. What's the definition of a recession? It's a slowdown in economic activity. A slowdown in economic activity is a slowdown in demand, which reduces inflation, folks. It actually helps their case. So even though you'll very unlikely ever hear anyone from the Federal Reserve make a statement that they're in favor of any kind of recession, behind the scenes, they're actually quietly, I wouldn't say hoping for one, but they understand that a recession would actually help their case, help their fight against inflation. And I've stated to you, I've been on the inside in the banking world. I was chairman of the board of a bank, of FDIC insured bank for a couple of years. So I understand a lot of how these people think. And bankers are generally pretty conservative. So they're far, I want you to understand, despite what you're hearing from the media, despite what you might be hearing from Wall Street, you need to understand the Federal Reserve is far, far more concerned about inflation than they are about recession. Inflation destroys countries, folks. Recession doesn't. Recession is healthy. It's like a washing out. It's like taking a shower. It's getting rid of the ugliness, the stuff, the excess, and you get to have a fresh start after a recession. It's actually a healthy part of the cycle. We're seeing in some of these articles about it's great, inflation, the rate of increase of inflation is below 2%, and all these types of things. And now the Federal Reserve is going to be looking at rate cuts and all that. I think it's a lot of hype and a lot of hope still. Again, I'm not saying they won't cut rates, but I do have a major fear that if the Federal Reserve cuts rates too soon, that they could reignite inflation and make it worse. And in fact, the Federal Reserve has echoed the same sentiment themselves, going to be far more reluctant to be moved quickly. And historically, the Federal Reserve is slow to move, slow to act. So don't expect them to jump quickly just because we've got a somewhat favorable inflation reading, one below 3%, which of course, relatively good news, but it's not the great news. It's still above the 2% target rate. And folks, it just means prices are still going up. They're just not going up. So you're not going to see things cheaper. It just means things are not going up as much. And some of the parts of the country are seeing this more than others. I can tell you, in fact, yesterday, we were in Idaho, went to a grocery store, had some major sticker shock. So much so, my wife had to step out of the grocery store because some of the things were just absolutely ridiculous in their prices. And this is something that people across the country are facing and continuing to face. And it ain't over yet because rate of inflation, I can't say this enough times. The rate of increase is slowing down, but it's still going up. Prices are still going up. They're not done going up yet. So that is not good news. Now, some of the banks are coming out, like JP Morgan and Chase and Goldman Sachs are now actually raising their projections for U.S. recession. There's increases in delinquencies on payments, on outstanding debt, and which is actually some of the highest levels we've seen, well, ever, all-time records, and I've shared that many times on the show. Many people are trying to downplay the impact of inflation for the last 3-4 years. The reality is grocery prices over the last 3-4 years are about 25% higher than they were. The average rent is more than double from where it was 3 to 4 years ago. Most people's incomes have not increased anywhere near those rates to keep up. So it's the cumulative effect of those high inflation numbers piling on top of each other, like compound interest. It's the cumulative effect that's so devastating. And again, please, it's not a reason to celebrate that inflation went up only 2.9%, and the first reading below 3% since March of 2021. Yes, it's relatively good news that it's slowing down. The rate of increase is slowing down. But people are still having to pay these higher prices. It's not like you're going to go to the grocery store and see cheaper prices. And for most people, their excess savings, as I stated earlier, has dried up. That's why we're seeing these extra delinquencies and all. So the likelihood of a recession, in fact, is much higher. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs agree. This is why I think this post from Elon Musk, I think it was so appropriate. As he states, the rise in prices or inflation is caused by government overspending, which increases the output of money faster than the increases in goods and services output. And that's the vast majority of the problem. It's further exacerbated by excess regulation, which prevents the market from solving unmet needs like housing in high demand areas. And I like this point he made here. He says occasionally there's monopolistic behavior by companies, but this is relatively rare and usually only possible if these companies have gained control of their industry regulator, which again is a government, not private sector problem. Well, that's a powerful statement he's made and a great explanation of the causes of inflation. The government continuing to overspend, continuing to print more money, and the money they already put in the system caused the inflation. They'll continue to exacerbate the problem. So until that is fixed, inflation is not going to get fixed. Recession will actually help reduce the rate of increase. But as long as there's increases, people are going to continue to get hurt. And you have to plan accordingly. It means your money has to go further. You have to make more just to make even, and you have to make your money work for you. Your personal bank is one of those things that can do that. With the ability to grow your money, have access to it, and the potential of earning positive arbitrage, in other words, earning interest on money after you spent it, are powerful tools to help you combat inflation. And with the ability to grow your money without downside risk if we do come across a market correction, which certainly is more likely in a recession. By protecting your downside, you can make sure the money you are saving and putting away doesn't go away. If you want more information on that, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com or 866-268-4422.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. And yes, you will reach me. So one of these other key points economically that are important is consumer sentiment is hitting another 8-month low. The U.S. isn't into recession. Certainly parts of it are. There's no question about that. But roughly 3 out of 5 Americans believe that it is, according to a recent Gallup poll. And it's funny how many of these people they interview, they say, well, we're in a strange situation where people don't feel like they're thriving in spite of many strong indicators in the economy. Well, the reality is simple. If the price of everything you buy costs a lot more, again, groceries are about 25% more than they were 4 years ago. Gas is nearly double, and your income has not increased accordingly, which for most people that's the case. Of course they feel poorer. And if their excess savings that maybe many people had accumulated due to COVID stimulus reasons has now been spent, they're in a financial bind. And here's the other part that the legacy media and the current administration in particular loves to ignore. The measurements of inflation are not the same as what they measured inflation with in the 1970s. I've shared that extensively on this show. In other words, our government plays games with the numbers, and they do it in a number of ways. They've been caught. Most people don't follow this and don't understand. They just understand in a gut instinct level that things are not right. And when they tell us it's only 2.9% inflation rate right now, most people don't believe it. Neither do I. Because again, they're playing games with the numbers. One of the ways they do that, again, this has been proven, how the government measured inflation back in the 1970s was far more accurate. In other words, they took a typical basket of goods that the average consumer would buy on a monthly or regular basis, and they would measure the prices, and it was pretty static. So if inflation, those items that people purchase, like a loaf of bread, for example, or a gallon of gas, went up accordingly, inflation would do so. Today, the government plays with the numbers by playing with what's in the basket. They put things in or take things out of that basket, and you can imagine they take the things out of the basket that have gone up the most recently and put things in the basket that have not increased as much. So they're playing with the basket of goods and services to manipulate the numbers downward. Just by using some of those tactics, I've shown where studies have gone back and measured current inflation levels the same way they did in the 1970s. And when we hit a peak of, I think, 9% inflation roughly a couple of years ago, it was more than double that. And most of the inflation numbers that the government, the official government inflation numbers have been giving us, have been about 2 to 3 times higher if you measured it in the 1970s. And they're doing that, of course, for political reasons to make it not look as bad as it really is. Yet when you look at your checkbook or you go to the grocery store or the gas pump, you know instinctively it's not good. And when they're trying to tell us it's the worst inflation we've seen in roughly 40 years, the reality is the inflation that we've seen in the last 3-4 years, again, if you measured it in the same way that they measured in the 1970s, it's actually far worse, which means this is some of the worst inflation that we have seen as a country in about 100 years. That's how significant it actually is. It was covered up somewhat by the record level of COVID relief funds that were injected into the economy. So it created a cushion so that many people were not impacted as much as they would have been otherwise. That cushion is primarily, for the most part, been spent. That money's gone. The statistics show actually many Americans got used to spending more and continue to do so even though those excess savings were now gone, so that the level of savings in the United States for the typical American is actually less than it was prior to COVID. So we're sitting in a situation where there's less savings, less cushion, with inflation that is still higher than the federal Reserve target, and is probably at least double that for real because of the way the government measures things and plays with the numbers and plays with the items that they measure in their basket of goods to give us the official CPI numbers. And if we want to take, for example, we've shared this before, where in the last year or two, the federal government has over-reported over about 1 million jobs over the past year, and then revised those numbers down a month or two later, almost every single month. If they're willing to play those kinds of games with unemployment numbers, what makes you think they're not playing with the CPI numbers? Of course they are. That's just the reality. So we're sitting in a situation where, again, inflation is still higher than it should be, probably far higher than in reality than it should be. We're dealing with the cumulative effects of the last several years of inflation. So if you just take grocery prices, for example, that have increased roughly 25%, according to the government. Again, you go to the grocery store, it's much higher than that on many typical items. But let's just stick with the government numbers for a minute. Well, even though the rate of inflation has slowed down, doesn't mean their prices are going back down. In other words, you're still paying 25% or more than that for items that you bought 3 or 4 years ago. The excess savings has been dissipated. And I know we don't talk a lot about global things, but this is important. Global debt has just hit a new high of $315 trillion, which is a new record. happens to be over 20% higher than it was at the beginning of COVID. And why should we care about global debt, debt of other countries? Well, the reality is this: it weakens economies across the world. And we're interconnected trade partners and everything else with many, many countries around the world. So if there is a debt crisis or a crisis of any sort of significance in another part of the world, it does have an impact on us. And we're in a situation here in the U.S. where debt servicing costs are now exceed defense spending. It's the number 3 expense item in our budget. And folks, it just keeps increasing because the government doesn't pay off the debt. They don't pay it down. They just keep kicking the can down the road and actually still spending more than they're receiving, which means they're incurring more debt. The past decade was known as the decade of low interest rates, easy money, monetary policy, cheap money. We created an asset bubbles in both the stock and real estate markets, obviously. I believe this next decade is going to be known as the debt crisis decade. The excess debt that the United States and many, many other countries are carrying are going to cause significant economic challenges. It certainly makes economies weaker. It makes it more difficult for them to deal with crises or challenges when they occur. It will make boom and bust cycles more dramatic, particularly anything in a bust cycle. So if we do see a correction, I believe it'll be exaggerated due to all the excess debt when we do see a true, real correction. And I think the bigger issue, this is even one bigger than even just the debt in itself. I like this message that somebody sent out, and I thought this was awesome. And they were pointing out credit card debt hits all-time new high, well over $1.1 trillion. But as he states, slavery did not end, it just got rebranded. And he points out that the same voices that crowd against the atrocities of slavery fail to see they are shackled in a modern form of bondage. And I've shared this idea before. Who owns them? The lender. What are the chains? Debt, taxes, the tools of the enslavement, credit cards, debt. And as he points out here, we're told we're free, yet we work tirelessly just to hand over chunks of our earnings to a system that keeps us perpetually indebted. We chase our dreams sold by us by corporations only to be trapped in a cycle of consumption and repayment. This isn't freedom. It's a sophisticated version of slavery hidden behind this facade of choice and democracy. And the most tragic part is most people don't even realize the chains are there. He's right. Debt is a killer. High interest rate debt in particular is so. Unfortunately, because of the high inflation that we've dealt with over the last several years, the cumulative effects of it have caused a lot of people to not only wipe out their savings, their cushion, but to reach down into debt. That's why we have record credit card debt, folks. A lot of people are financing their lifestyle, their basic expenses even, with debt. That doesn't end well, no matter how you cut it, and it creates a cycle of financial slavery. This is not a good situation we're in. It's not a good situation. And your personal bank actually is a tool that can help enhance paying off debt, can help you pay off debt faster. If you're in that situation, I strongly encourage you to contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. I can help you with a plan to get yourself out of debt. There's no worse time to have debt than when interest rates are higher. There's no worse time to have debt when the economy is more uncertain and the likelihood of recession is higher. Because what if your income is impacted? That's certainly a higher risk in times of recession, whether you're a business owner, your income, whatever that may be. Your income could be affected negatively or wiped out altogether even due to economic reasons. And having debt on top of that just exacerbates it further. And I'll share one more thought with this. I'm a financial guy and I focus on the financial things, but I always say there's things in life that are far more important than money and finances. One of those happens to be stress. Stress is a killer, folks. Doctors will tell you that about half of all disease is caused by stress. And what's the number one cause of divorce? Financial stress. This is real world stuff, folks. So if you don't want to go down that path and be indebted to debt, be a slave to debt, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com and I'll help you devise a plan to get you out of debt even faster and start to thrive rather than struggle.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com. So there's been a lot of talk recently about this proposal that Trump came up with back in June, I believe, about no tax on tips. And now Kamala Harris has now echoed that from a non-political standpoint. Let's just state from an economic standpoint, I'm glad to hear that both sides are talking about the same thing. This means the likelihood of that occurring are greater, so that in itself is a good thing. I believe that people that work for a living who receive a significant portion of their income from tips should not be taxed. In fact, the fact of the matter is the Biden administration created a program called Sitka to further scrutinize reporting tips to the IRS. And this policy has become very burdensome to many people who work on tips. Ask anyone in that field and you'll find out what's going on. Many of the IRS agents that have been hired on, it was claimed that they were going to go after high income earners. The reality is many of them have been harassing people, waitresses, drivers, people like that rely on a lot of their income based off tips. And there's a simple reason behind it. You see, if you become a new IRS agent, and I've got some insights on that. My sister is a supervisor at the IRS, okay, folks? I know some IRS agents. And if you're going to go after a high income earner, someone who's more sophisticated, they typically have attorneys, tax attorneys, CPAs, more sophisticated, more challenging, frankly, for the IRS to go after someone like that. The IRS agent has to be more experienced, more knowledgeable, more training. It takes time, years, folks, in many cases, for an IRS agent, revenue officer, to have the expertise, knowledge, and all to work on a case like that, doing an audit, and be successful. You hire these new agents on, what are you going to do? Just like any new employee with any industry, you're going to have them work on the easy projects first, the low-hanging fruit. Well, guess what is low-hanging fruit right now? People who receive tips. And then with this new Sitka program, as they call it, again, passed by the Biden administration. In fact, Kamala was the deciding vote in the Senate for this to pass. It was a very divisive policy. Of course, all the Democrats voted for it in favor, and Kamala was the deciding vote. So she voted. So even though she's now coming out saying she's proposing no tax on tips, she was the deciding vote in the Senate for the Sitka program, which authorized the IRS to further scrutinize and go after people on tips. So her actions, what I always say, your actions speak so loudly that what you say I cannot hear. It's a very wise thing to follow. Her actions are one way, obviously encouraging the IRS to pursue people on tips. Her statements are another. We'll see what's actually true, won't we? Well, hopefully not. And she copied the idea for Trump. So come on, do you want the real deal or you want the copycat? I don't know about you, but I'm going for the real deal. But I am very much in favor of a no tax on tips, because these are people in general, let's face it, are not some of the higher income earners in the society. They work hard for what they do. And anyone's gone out to dinner or whatever, your waitress works hard, waiter or waitress, and somebody who does a good job is much appreciated. And I would like to see, if I'm giving them a tip for good service, because that's really what it's about, I'd like to see them keep it all. The government, in my opinion, has no business being involved with that private transaction between me and that waiter or waitress. If they did a good job and I want to give them a tip, or if they did an exceptional job and I want to give them an exceptional tip, that should be up to me and that person who did a good job. More incentive for performance. We should encourage more of that, not discourage it by getting the IRS and the U.S. government in the middle of all that. They have no business being there. In my opinion, it's just a basic freedom we should enjoy. But there's another issue I want to bring up that I think is very important. With all the inflation we've had, the government spending excess money, causing the inflation and continuing to do so, part of that reason is now it's been reported that U.S. taxpayers are now on the hook for over $450 billion per year in housing and care for illegal immigrants. So not only we don't have enough problems that we're spending money left and right, more than the federal government spent, far more than it receives. It's estimated they're going to spend about $2 billion more this year than they receive. But about a quarter of that excess, if that turns out to be true, is going to illegal immigrants, which of course are people that do not belong here, have no legal right to be here. By definition, they're illegal. It's against the law. Why should our hard-earned money, taxpayer dollars, be going to people that don't belong here legally? They're illegal. That's the definition. Why should we have to pay for that? And even though the government may not have the money to pay it, of course, they print extra money, which creates more inflation for all of us, for everyone to deal with, which means, of course, we all pay more. And folks, let me go back to it. It's illegal. Why is your and my tax dollars going towards something that is illegal? That is unacceptable. Any representative that supports open borders, illegal immigration, needs to be replaced, unless you just want to keep paying more money for your bread and your gas, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Keeping that in mind. That's not political. That's economic facts, folks. That's dollars and cents. Keep that in mind. And I know this one might be a bit of a heavy lift, but I think this is important to share too. And I'm seeing more and more issues about property taxes. And I agree completely with this sentiment. And the point this gentleman pointed out, he said, property taxes are the most unjustified form of taxation and should be abolished immediately. And he goes on with his statement. I agree with this sentiment completely. When you buy a property, the illusion is that you own it outright. But property taxes reveal the chilling truth. The government maintains a perpetual claim on what supposedly is yours. And they demand payment each year just for you to keep your own home. And if you fail to pay, they'll seize what rightfully belongs to you, which means it's merely a lease from the government. Now, he's so right about this. In fact, as many of you know, listening to the show, I'm half Hungarian. Do you know that the country of Hungary has no property tax? There are other countries like that. Property taxes are not necessary. And then some people will say, well, how are they going to pay for the roads and schools and things like that? There's other ways to accomplish that. There's things like sales taxes, income taxes, and various things. The state, the counties, and such do not need to impose a property tax. Because here's the other part of it that's insidious. You see, this tool, the property tax, penalizes everyone. But of course, as in inflation, it affects those especially on fixed incomes, folks that are retired, that cannot afford to keep paying the ever increasing property tax. Here's a statement I hear people all the time. They'll say, well, my property, our property values have gone up this year and they're happy about it. And my statement to them is this always: why are you happy about that? Are you planning to sell and move? And the answer in most cases is no. If you own a property and you're planning to move, yes, of course you want it to go up in value, but that's really more of an investment property. I'm talking about your home, your personal residence, where you plan to live, hopefully for a long time. What about your retirement home? Something you never plan to never sell. Why in the world would you want it to go up in value? Because if it goes up in value, guess what happens, folks? The property taxes go up with it. It costs you more to keep it. As this person states, your lease, your rent payment from the government just went up. You still have to pay the property taxes. And if the value goes up, guess what? The property tax goes up in most cases. That's not right. There's nothing good about that. And again, as this person pointed out, it particularly hurts those on fixed income or lower income folks. And many times on these fixed income retirees, they've paid into the system. They worked hard. They paid the price. They paid their taxes. And now, due to age or health, are unable to work anymore. Why should they continue to be penalized by having to pay increasing property tax? Now, I know some counties around the country will allow you to freeze your property tax if you're retired, some under certain income levels. Those are good things. But frankly, I agree with this person. Property taxes just mean you do not actually really own your property. You're really just leasing it from the government. And if you don't pay them, they're going to take it from you. They're going to seize it from you. Do you really own it? Or are you leasing it? Are you really a renter? See, that's a thought process that if the majority of Americans would come around to, we could make some real difference. And that's what they really need to understand and stop doing as I was stating in the earlier segment, discussing the financial slavery. Like he said, slavery didn't end. It just got rebranded. People are told they're free. They're told they own the property. But yet they keep working and handing over more and more of their money every year to debtors, to the government. And they're trapped in a cycle of consumption and repayment. And like he stated, it's not freedom, it's a sophisticated version of slavery. Now, that's the system we live under now. I understand this, and I have a heavy libertarian streak. I understand that. There's no reason why things couldn't improve, why we couldn't reduce or eliminate property tax in this country for most, if not everyone. That would be the right thing to do. That would certainly reduce the size of government, which is the cause of our recent inflation with the overspending, for example, and a cause of many of our economic challenges we're dealing with. So in my opinion, this would all be very good things. Government is not the solution. Ronald Reagan famously stated, government is the problem, not the solution.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com, and yes, you will reach me. I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but if you've looked at, say, the last several presidential election cycles, you can look this up. It's very interesting, where you can look at a map of the United States and look at, how they voted, red or blue, obviously, and go by even precinct or county, but research it by county. And what you're going to quickly find out is that there are no blue states. None. There's plenty of red states, but there are no blue states. What I mean by this is you'll see very quickly that says about 15 to 20 big blue cities that, in essence, are trying to tell the rest of us how to live. They're highly congregated, highly congested in these cities, and they're trying to push their agenda: more socialism, more government spending, all those kinds of things that they do, open borders, more inflation, more government on most of the country. If you, again, you look at a county map along the coast of California, but you go inland and you see lots and lots of red. Even California has big, big chunks of red. And then if you look at the entire state, is really not a blue state. It's not a liberal state. Most people, most Americans, the bottom line is the reality is this: they just want to be left alone. They want the government to do its job. It has a constitutional duty to do certain things like commerce, national security, things like that. We'd love to see it do it efficiently, financially efficiently, using some common sense. Boy, wouldn't that be awesome? It'd be great if they would stop overspending. In fact, they could reduce the size of government. I believe they could do like Elon Musk did with Twitter. They could reduce the size of government by 80 to 90% of employees and be a lot more efficient and actually do what they're supposed to be doing and stop doing the stuff they're not supposed to be doing. They're involved. The federal government has gotten so entrenched in our lives, has gone so far beyond the original intent. And by the way, that's the name of a book that I read over 20 years ago, but it made a tremendous impact on my life. It's called Original Intent. I can't remember the name of the author, but it went into the original intent of the founding fathers. It went into much of the Federalist Papers. And if you haven't read any of those things, I highly encourage you to do so. Of course, if you haven't read the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution recently, like in the last year, go back to it, read it. It takes like 10 or 15 minutes. They're not huge, long, difficult documents to understand. They're actually pretty straightforward. And by the way, some of the language, particularly in the Declaration, is some of the most inspiring language that you'll read anywhere. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and all that, right? Inspiring, it's uplifting, it's encouraging. If you're feeling a little down and frustrated, it's something you should read occasionally, because these are the founding documents of our nation, of our country, of our government. It was Jefferson or Washington, I can't remember at the moment. They basically said, I'm paraphrasing, citizens expect to be free and ignorant. They will soon be neither. My point is, you cannot expect to be free and be ignorant. You have to have some knowledge. And I know it was Jefferson that stated it. The prerequisite for democracy is an educated electorate. There's people had to be educated. But when you read some of these words, again, I do this sometimes. I mean, I go back through and read the Bible periodically at various times and stuff for encouragement and various reasons. And I encourage anyone to do that. It's inspiring. It's uplifting. It's encouraging, especially at times when you're feeling a little frustrated, a little down. It's been a rough few years. I get it. I'm not particular. A lot of people are going to be surprised by this statement. I am not a particularly political person. I've become so because I feel our society, our government, our way of life is threatened. That's the only reason. Frankly, I would love to be, as I was a few years ago, pursuing life, liberty, and happiness, right? Living my life, raising my family, building my business, working with clients, traveling, doing stuff I enjoy to do, having fun, and not worrying about what's going on in Washington, because I was be relatively assured that they're doing their job, hopefully doing it rather well and efficiently, and making sure we're all safe and secure as citizens. I mean, isn't that the basic purpose of any government? I mean, if a government does not ensure security and safety for its citizens, offer some kind of like fair playing field from an economic standpoint, that's what commerce is, then why do we have a government in the first place? What's the point? If you're going to have chaos, I mean, chaos is the natural state of order of things. You don't have to work for chaos. Chaos just happens. If you have a government that it doesn't prevent that, then what use are they? What good are they? And if they're not doing things like basic things like protecting our border, what do we need a government for? If they're not providing for security and safety of their citizens, what's the point? And these are the things that we as Americans need to answer. Who do we want? We are a representative republic. Unfortunately, we're not a direct democracy. We're not like Athens, where back then it was every, I think, male landowner, if I believe correctly, got up and had a vote. Well, we're far too big a country for that. I mean, there's over 300 million Americans. We have a representative republic. We vote in people to represent us, and that should be taken very seriously. We should really look at and understand who are we voting for, and how are they representing us? What are they doing for our best interests? Are they going to likely provide for security and safety for citizens? In other words, are they going to support a secure border? Are they going to be in favor of economic security? Are they going to advocate for the government to be financially responsible and stop spending more money than it receives? Stop causing more and more inflation for all of us to have to deal with? Or are they going to be the opposite and just continue to spend? I mean, look at the record. If they're already up there in office, to me, that's the ironic thing here. This part that's to me is so frustrating. Almost every one of our representatives in Congress, for example, get reelected. In fact, I've seen studies showing that the reelection rates for Congress is higher than the Soviet Politburo, for example. And that's ridiculous. Just because you recognize somebody's name is not some reason you should vote for them. Just because they have a D or an R or an I in front of their name is not the reason you should vote for them. The reason you should vote for somebody or support them or whatever is, what are they going to do for citizens in terms of safety, security for the citizens? What are they going to do for economic security and stability and being fiscally responsible? Those are the things that our representatives should be focused on. And again, if they look up their record, it's not hard to do. There's many, many places that issue the voting records for representatives in Congress, for example, that you can go to. And if they're voting in favor of spending more money than we receive, then what you're doing is you're voting in favor of continued future inflation. It's that simple. I don't care if you receive some money from the government. Guess what? You're going to get to pay more for everything also. And the fact that our federal government is now spending over $450 billion a year on illegals, anyone who doesn't do everything in their power to shut that down is an economic anarchist. They're crazy. It will kill us financially and will ultimately destroy our country eventually, our way of life, our society. If you're in favor of that, keep voting for those people. If not, vote the other way. Fine. Folks that are against open borders, they're there. They run. They're running for office. And the good news is more and more people are waking up, and more people. I know in the past it was frustrating because it was hard to find much difference. I know many presidential elections, it seemed like, we had a Democrat and a rhino, and there was barely any difference between the two. You can't say that this time. You literally this time, in terms of the presidential election and vice president, are literally now looking at the difference between capitalism and communism. Forget the politics, and I'm not name calling here. It's just a fact. If you want to see a free society, a free and open economic society, and continue to see economic growth and the best economic system ever in history for human beings, you want to continue that for your own life, for your kids, your grandkids, then vote for capitalism. If you want to take away everybody's rights and give everything to the government and watch millions of people suffer personally, financially, economically, and physically, vote for communism, because that's what's happened every time it's been tried. I know those argued, well, it was tried here, it was tried there, but it wasn't put into effect. It wasn't put in effectively. No, it was. It's been tried over 100 times throughout human history, and every single time has failed miserably for like 98, 99% of the population. Yeah, 1 or 2% thrive tremendously because they have the right connections. The rest suffer. I have personal family members who lived through communism in Hungary when the Soviets took over. Folks, it's not pretty. And if you don't think it can't happen here, wake up, because it can happen here too. As I was starting to say, read. We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are inspiring words. And if you want to educate your kids against socialism, I know so many young kids are getting taught this in school, and it's sad. You want to inoculate against them? Here's a great idea. Have them clean the bathroom. Pay them $10. Then give away half of that money to their sibling who didn't help, or a friend, or whatever, who did nothing. Won't seem so attractive to them at that point. Because, folks, that's what socialism is. One person works, half of their money is taken away from them and given to someone else who doesn't, who refuses to, certainly capable, but doesn't, or doesn't deserve it. Folks, that's socialism. That's communism. Whether you want to vote for capitalism or communism. And communism is just another form of socialism. It's all in the book of Marx. If you haven't read it, Karl Marx, they're all related. Capitalism is when bread is lined up waiting for people. And socialism is people waiting in line for bread. Which life do you want to live? What direction do you want our country to go? What society do you want to live in? If you want to thrive through these economic challenges as we're dealing with them, as we're going forward, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. I'll be happy to help you thrive in this higher interest rate environment, economic uncertainty, increased likelihood of recession ahead, but I'll help you thrive through it. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com. And as always, stay tuned. Next week's show, we're sharing some more great information. And as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.